enough. That was good enough.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm late, Mark, to Good Enough. Welcome to Good Enough.
Welcome. Hey, I'm Mark Lips, and you guys, this is Good Enough. My co-host over here, Miss
Sam Lewis.
Lewis. Our sponsors are the Ripe Choice Farm Stay and Catering here in Northern California, as well as our weekly newsletter, Happy Friday Neighbors, 25 years in the making. Sam?
On this side of the country in Bloomington, Illinois, is Pride Staff, staffing agency, full service staffing agency, temp to hire, direct hire, and headhunting. Also, Sam Substack, which is the producer of Finally Friday Philosophy, a newsletter that comes out on Friday, so you can read because you're not really working on Friday.
I like it. I like it. I think
you can't see it, but I got a Pride Staff shirt on.
I see that. I am taking. I think I lifted one of your things from your Finally Friday.
What'd you lift?
It was, or maybe I took it from Facebook. It was Zen and the Artist Motorcycle. It was celebrating his birthday.
Oh, yeah. That's a wonderful book. I think you've read. I think we've talked about it. Haven't you read it?
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Long time ago. Anyway, I'm excited about today. This guy, Troy, and you got to bring up some of that history.
Well, I also was thinking, since I talked to you last, I worked at General Tire all those years, right? So we had all kinds of Sheltons in the plant from Wayne City.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Fairfield, Wayne City. Yeah.
Wow.
So they had to be, I never thought about it, but they got to be related, some of them.
Yeah.
But it's funny. It never really got talked about a lot, but not that you sat around talking about.
Yeah. So we, I guess it's not much to say about him other than he's, well,
I got a lot of questions, he's got quite a business going on, and he's got several other books, and
right.
He's got the whole shtick with the haunted Southern Illinois thing.
Yeah.
But, it was funny. His book was a lot of history, and just at least the parts I've read, I haven't got through all of it yet, but really not that much about the haunted part, about the woods.
Well, I think even in the title, do you have the book there with you?
I have it on Kindle.
Oh, okay. Even the title, which, Blood, Bullets, and Booze. He's not really talking about the haunted stuff.
Yeah, right.
He's talking about the history of gangsters in Southern Illinois. And
I tell you, when you grow up in it, you don't quite think about it. But when you read the book and then you move somewhere else and you go, man, that, because no wonder people were hinky about unions and strikes when I was a kid. And they go, man, they're going on strike.
Yeah.
They're going on strike. You know what that means around here.
I wish I could, ask my dad some questions about that.
Me too. That's what happens.
Hey,
it's 3:00, my friend.
All right. I'll see you on the flip side.
All right.
For our listeners, guys, this is Troy Taylor, who is an author, a writer, and makes the rest of us look like we don't do anything. But Troy, tell us a little bit about yourself. Just give us the bio. I know what I know about you just from the books and stuff, but other than that, like where are you from? Southern Illinois?
No, I grew up in Illinois, mostly in central Illinois. Now, my family came from southern Illinois, down around McLeansboro. So I, spent a lot of time in that area when I was growing up and around central Illinois. And I really didn't start out with a big interest in gangs of southern Illinois. It was really just all the legends and lore and true crime. My great grandfather was a police officer, so he used to, when I was a kid, well, he was long retired by the time I was born, but when I was a kid, he used to probably tell me stories that were not suitable for a child under 10 to be told, but I ate that stuff up, which is probably why he kept telling me. He was an Irish immigrant, so it was lots of ghost stories and lots of years that he had spent walking the beat in Decatur, Illinois, which was a pretty rough town in his day, and
Still
well,
is.
still can be. That's what I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
still
Still
is.
is, but just a different kind of crime now. But he, used to tell me all these stories, and it just got me interested in it. And when I went looking to see what I wanted to do as a career, I, had always been somebody who loved to tell stories and write stories, and that's what I gravitated toward. And between the true crime and the ghost stories, it's kept me busy for 30 years now. So
Wow.
that's really all I've ever done. And it's a lot of fun. There's that, they always say that, you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And, it's an old adage, but it is somewhat true, although it is a lot of work. But it is a lot of fun. So I can never really complain. So
Some people
You
have
say
to
Central Illinois. Where do you mean by Central?
mostly around Decatur. My
Decatur.
folks have a farm in Mowequa, which most people don't know where it is, but it's south of Decatur, just a little bit, about 10, 12 miles or so. And so I grew up around that area in Springfield and all around. And then, of course, between the back and forth with my dad's uncles down in McLeansboro and stuff. So I got to spend a lot of time down there. So that's kind of, I think, what started my love of Southern Illinois, that and the old slave house.
The old slave house, right?
I used to, man, I think I must have been maybe 4 or 5 the first time my folks took me there. And I kept going back literally until the day they closed that thing. And it's been sitting empty ever since. But so everywhere between there on pretty much both sides of the state, I just that was my stomping ground when I was a teenager and even a little older than that. I just loved to go down in that area. And I think that's kind of what had always attracted me to, the gangs and the Charlie Berger and the Shelton brothers and things. And, and then moved over to the Alton area. So then I hear a lot about East St. Louis and
Right.
how different it used to be. And, that got me into the Sheltons. And so it's just been one of those things that it was one of those books that eventually was going to happen, at some point. And
Yeah, right.
so I decided to knock it off my list and do it this year. So
we lost Mark. I
saw
sure
that.
we've done this before, so we just keep going. But if you hung out in McLeansboro, I'm sure we know similar people. I grew up in Mount Vernon, and I worked at the General
Sure.
Tire plant.
Yeah.
So we had all the all the Sloans worked there. Jerry Sloan's family and all those people, and all kinds of Billy Rocket and that group. And I don't know if you knew any of those guys, but they're all about my age. And
all my relatives down there were quite a bit. I mean, they were my dad's uncles, so they were.
So what would have been their
was.
Surname?
Hawkins.
Hawkins
On that, yeah. And
I'll bet you there was hardly anybody associated at that plant.
I'm sure there are people around there that knew them when they were alive. And I had a couple of my grandmother's aunts and uncles and all kinds of people lived around that area. So we just got to go out to the farm, and it was. My parents had a farm, but not the kind of farm that that they did. So it was with the cows and the and my aunt bringing us straight in buttermilk and expecting me to drink it, and the old school kind of stuff. And I can just barely remember a lot of it, but it was a lot of fun when I was growing up.
My grandmother taught school in Decatur.
Oh, okay. Well,
Hazel Hirons. Did she ever that name ring a bell?
Doesn't ring a bell, but I did most of my school in Mowequa. So so I was mostly went to school down there, and then grew up around the area, and then moved into Decatur, into the big city. And that's when I started writing and that kind of thing.
So did you take writing in college, or did you just start writing? Just
started writing. I think the best way, at least what I tell people, I think the best way to learn to write is to read voraciously.
Yeah, I agree.
I started reading when I was 4. I taught myself to read, and I don't go anywhere at any time without a book in my hand. Never have.
Yeah,
so I've always been an avid reader, and I think that makes a huge difference, for people who, think they want to do it, but it's also one of those things where I couldn't write anything technical if I had to. I'd have to, so it really depends on what you're writing.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I like to write largely the way I tell my stories. So I write casually, and that seems to be something that people enjoy. So I enjoy doing it.
Well, I certainly enjoyed your writing. I mean, I enjoyed the flow. I enjoyed the, tempo, and it seemed to fit the subject very well.
Oh yeah.
Um,
It's one of those stories. It's that whole story of those gangs. It's hard to, I mean, yes, I mean, I know a lot of people died, and this sounds like I'm making light of that, but it's hard to take it too seriously because it's almost like a comedy of errors half the
It is.
time with those guys.
It is.
They were always, trying to kill each other once they got to that part. First, we're trying to kill the Klan, which is, that in itself. I was trying to make people understand, and I'll do a presentation. I do a presentation on this. I do these dinner events, and I get to the point where the authorities in Southern Illinois, and especially in Williamson County, are inviting the Ku Klux Klan in to restore order. And I'm saying, listen, I mean, it was different then, but not that much different. And so it's hard for people to understand just how crazy of a notion that was, but they did it. And I mean, they certainly paid the price for it, but between them trying to kill the Klan and the Klan trying to kill them, and all these shootouts at voting time, and then when they started shooting each other, and the ridiculousness of the armored tank they put together, and dropping bombs from airplanes, and it's just
I think that was the first bomb ever dropped from an airplane. I think
that's what
right?
I always thought, but I found out that wasn't true. I found out that in 1921, the police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, were dropping dynamite bombs on rioters during the race riots.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
that was. You can understand. We've been saying for years that it was Southern Illinois, and everybody in Tulsa just kept real quiet about that. Because they
kept real quiet about a lot of things.
You want to brag about.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I was telling Mark, Mark and I both grew up in Southern Illinois, Mount Vernon, and reading through your book, I suddenly started realizing, no wonder when I was a kid and people talked about, well, this or companies going on strike, it was serious stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was a little
turned
different.
Everybody's guts. And now I kind of start realizing why, because these, while my parents didn't live through that, they certainly, their parents did. My grandfather did. They lived in Benton.
Yeah.
And,
the people who lived through that kind of violence, and then, with the strikes that went on, that it was serious stuff. I mean, you're living in a time when men had a single income for the most part, unless they were bootleggers or something. And they worked in the mines. And if you lost that job, your family starved. And not only that, but if you worked for a mine, you probably lived in a mine house. You had to shop in the mine's grocery store. Everything was owned by the company. And if you went on strike, you had nothing. And so they took that stuff very, very seriously. I talk, sometimes I'll talk about the Heron Massacre, and people can't wrap their heads around it. And this is not to justify it, but it's to explain it. The fact that these guys, saw these scabs coming in and taking their jobs. And, they had a promise from the owner of the mine that he would hold off on shipping anything. He'd keep paying them, and they could keep mining, and then he wouldn't ship anything until the strike was over. And then he broke his word. And so these guys were extremely hostile about this, and it turned into violence, as a lot of things in Southern Illinois did over time. I mean, I don't think it's just Southern Illinois, but you still have was a violent area from the very beginning. And I tried to tie that in from the beginning of the book. Is these are things that were happening here. It's not really a surprise that the next step up was the Klan coming in and people trying to kill each other, and then the outlaws turning against each other, and it was just one step to the next. But when you're living in the 20s, and even then you get into the Depression, you that was the only way you had to feed your family. And when your job was taken away, or you did anything you could to make sure that your family ate, and if that meant you drove around a little bootleg liquor, or you looked the other way when somebody was doing something that they weren't supposed to, but a law that nobody really had much use for anyway, but even so, it was still against the law. But there were so many police officers and, politicians and city officials who looked the other way because, yeah, feed your family, man. And there was no easy way to do that back then. It wasn't like you could get online and start a business,
I just watched what's Lawless.
Yeah.
Bondurant boys and the brothers. And, that seemed very, and I know that as far as Hollywood, it was more, they say the movie was more the myth than
Sure.
it was real deal. But still, the nature of it was, once the Bogle Act was done, once the Prohibition was over with, they went back to farming and doing whatever else that, because then the Depression was a little bit behind them, and but you did what you had to do, and I think the police and others knew that. It was only when, obviously, when you started killing people that.
Right.
That's
right.
usually,
But,
that's usually when
That's
you get those.
wait a second, wait.
yeah,
It's interesting. Both Sam and I wish we could talk to people who are no longer with us,
I know,
because we all grew up hearing about the Sheltons and
sure.
and all of that. And I mean, my grandfather, I think in one of my notes to you, he was invited to Charlie Berger's hanging, and he didn't go. And then Sammy's got your grandfather was invited.
My grandfather went, this is what my Uncle Hallie always claimed, that he, that famous picture of Charlie Berger in the square I saw one of close up, but there's one where it's way back.
Oh, it's thousands of people.
People that,
yeah.
Hallie Fred always said that he was in that picture. He's in a baby stroller at one corner, with my grandfather and grandmother, and Hallie's in this baby stroller in the picture.
Wow.
But he always claims to have been at the hanging.
Yeah.
But, I had on the Shelton side, I went to church with a lady who was related to them somehow. And she, Mark knows her, Betty Hodge, and they would go, she said when she was a kid, they would go to Fairfield to visit somebody.
Carl.
Yeah.
And they had a long drive, and there would be a car at the start of the drive, and there'd be a man in it, and they'd have to go past this man, drive up the drive. Sunday afternoon, they'd go in the house. They would stay in the house. The curtains were always pulled. She said it was the oddest experience, and then they'd leave. And she says, as a kid, I didn't have any idea why these people lived a strange life that they lived.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I didn't really know until I started really digging into all this about how, because when I first started, as I was working on the book, but I started to do these presentations and, on the gangs of Southern Illinois, and I kept getting all these reservations from Fairfield. All these people were coming from Fairfield to hear these stories. And I kept thinking, well, I mean, I'm sure some of these people probably know these stories already, but then they come there and they're like, oh, we didn't know this and we didn't know that. And I didn't realize how the Sheltons, how everyone turned against them toward the end and really ran them out of town, mostly thanks to Blackie Harris. But I didn't realize just how bad it got. I just had a guy, I was just doing it, one of those the other day, and I had a guy come up to me and started telling me this story about his ex-grandfather-in-law used to tell him a story about how he farmed some land outside of Fairfield, and one day somebody shot at him. And I said, what was his name, Hill? And he said, yeah. I said, that's in the book. Yeah, that's a story in the book. Nobody wanted anybody on that property because they wanted they were trying to lease it out, and the town people wanted the Sheltons to starve. And I just didn't realize.
As you say in the book, they leveled the Sheltons after they all left. After Carl, they burned down anything that they owned. They destroyed
blew up the building on the square. I mean,
right. My great grandmother had a farm next to Carl Shelton's farm, and she used to talk about. And my uncle used to talk about how a day that somebody just came up there and just shot Carl Shelton off his tractor.
Man, man, and
Those
that's
boys
something.
were always shooting each other off the tractors.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Carl,
Unless you're Roy, and then you fall off the tractor, and then it runs over you too.
Yeah, right.
That's yeah. That I don't think it gets much worse than that. So
That's a
they
bad
have-
day right there.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas Charlie Berger, you know, he didn't live long enough to get the wrath of
No.
the citizens. I think he was truly
Well, and that's why he's still this Robin Hood character in Harrisburg. So I've been down there a couple of times, and I've spoke at the library down there, and I have spent a lot of time there and trying to track down anything that's left, and there just really isn't anything. I mean, you can't even tell like where Shady Rest was or anything anymore. The only reminder that really is though is if you're riding on Highway 13 and you go out and there's a big sign that says Lori Price Memorial Highway, and I thought, do they not know the whole story behind Lori Price?
exactly.
I
Yeah,
know
there's
that Charlie
nothing
killed him,
there.
but-
There's
but
nothing there on 13.
No, there isn't. And
It's
I
just-
keep thinking, do they know that he was like in league with the criminals? I mean, but whatever.
right.
But so they still around Harrisburg, people still see him as this, this Robin Hood kind of
Yeah,
character,
they'll
taking care
tell
of
you that
people.
to this
I-
day.
And don't get me
always-
wrong, he did
I
do
always
that.
grew up thinking Charlie Berg was a cool guy.
Oh yeah, no, me too.
And,
And he definitely had his bad points,
I never asked my dad, and I'm sure my dad had been there or some if he ever went to Shady Rest. But Sam, didn't your
Well,
dad or your
My
granddad?
grandmother had said something about Grandpa Lewis hanging out the Shady Rest. Although here's the one thing I'm sure it was because of the alcohol, because he was
Yeah.
he died in his 50s and he definitely was an
Well,
alcoholic.
nobody put there was no weird connotation to any of this stuff, because we're looking back at it now and we're saying, oh, this was this famous place, but it wasn't famous at the time.
No,
It was just a place on the
just
edge of
also-
town. And Charlie Berger was just this guy this hoodlum in town that some people liked and some people didn't. It's now all these years later that we look back and go, oh, wow, and
Also, the
it's
nefarious
different.
part of his operation was out behind the Shady.
Mhm. Right,
the-
behind the barbecue joint.
The barbecue people.
Everybody came. I mean, it was right on the highway. Why not?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that
it's
So
yeah,
going back to your writing thing, are you
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I had the pleasure of meeting Eric Larson one time, and
Ooh.
I was asking him about how he writes books, and he was telling me that he doesn't pass a library. He can't walk past a library. He has to go in. He says he's a research hound, He
Yeah,
says
yeah.
and his claim is that any what am I say, speech or anything in in quotes in a book,
Right.
he did not write. He found it in a document.
Yeah.
So you've got to be a bit of a research hound.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I'm at the age where I started still at the tail end of the only way to do research was to go to the library or to go to the archives or go to the state, or dig through city directories and stuff. And sometimes you still have to do that. But back when I started, that was the only way to do it. So I spent countless hours straining my eyes over microfiche, in library basements trying to find stuff I'm looking for. And it was hard back then. If you didn't know exactly when something happened, you could be looking through a whole spool of trying to find daily
Sure.
newspapers. It's gotten easier over the years. And in a lot of cases, I think that for a lot of people, it's gotten too easy. Because I find every once in a while I'll find a book that comes out that's nothing but, its whole reference section is nothing but people's websites. Well, that's not research.
Yeah.
That's, but what has gotten a lot easier is that archives and ancestry and birth records and death records and newspapers galore. Now you can get anything. I mean, but on the other hand, that's a rabbit hole that you that you have to be careful of if you've got any kind of deadline, because I'm one of those people who I can jump in and start looking for something and I can spend days printing out articles. A friend of mine laughed, and she's kind of the same way I am. And she says, it's funny, you can spend 4.5 hours. There's nothing that quite like the feeling of spending 4.5 hours researching what will become one sentence in a book. And it's the truth sometimes.
Well,
I
those
just
are, yep.
can't
But
stop.
when you're a historian at heart, which I think both Sam and I are, or at least I know I am. It's all I read, and it's all I.
Yeah.
Mark's more so than me, and certainly his brother's
Mark.
even more than that.
Mark's
brother.
I mean, but you know, yeah, you go down that. My problem now with digital media, I can be watching a movie because I love movies based on
Mhm.
real stories, real life, and all
Yeah.
of that. Lawless, for instance.
Sure.
And the kids and my wife, everybody jokes because as soon as the movie starts, I'm in my phone
Trying to see what's
fact-checking,
true and what's not. Yeah.
Researching.
fact checking,
Yeah.
doing all kinds of stuff, or finding the backstory to something that happened.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so
Well,
it's
Troy-
if it's me and it's a movie I love, or it's a movie that it's set somewhere, covering something that I know a lot about, it's like I have to either decide what I'm going to do. I'm either going to watch the movie and enjoy it and accept it for what it is, or I'm just going to go insane, because it's like one of my favorite movies is The Untouchables, but there is nothing in that movie that is accurate. And I mean nothing other than, yes, there was an Elliot Ness, and yes, there was an Al Capone.
Right.
That's about it.
Yeah.
But the movie is so much fun to watch. So you have to kind of put that out of your mind.
I love
and
that.
Move on.
It
you know?
is a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Sean Connery in that movie.
I do too.
Oh, but
I
that's
do
that.
too.
That's that. And then, and yeah, and when you are kind of a historian, or at least even an amateur historian, when you see things, you go, "There's no one check this stuff out."
I know, right?
No one
I
had
know.
that weapon. No one had
Right.
that weapon at that time. you know?
Right.
What are they shooting? You know,
Yeah.
where'd you get that?
So, listener, I want to elucidate Troy's background here. I assume that's not a real background. I mean, I assume
Oh,
it is
no.
a real background
It's my
and
office.
not fake.
Yeah. No, it's
Your
just
office,
my office.
and it looks like books,
Yep.
racks of books, and
Yep.
a ghost.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
Mother
you read.
Macabre.
boards and all that stuff. So yeah, it's just a small part of it there.
See, the
Yeah.
bibliophile in
So-
me just wants to
Oh yeah.
start going
yeah.
through that. Right?
Well, and
Just-
that's the thing. I have so many books, and I can never. In fact, there's no thing as too many books. That
You can't- no,
that
that's
doesn't
fact.
exist. That's not
I
a thing.
finally
So-
slimmed my collection down. I had a whole. I mean,
I
yeah.
don't know how you do that.
I do it every once in a while. I will
I did.
prune a few things. Like if I'm getting ready to move, I'll go, oh, okay, do I
But
really
the thing
need this?
is, when
And then
did-
I find a need for it. And then I got to go find it again.
Well, yeah,
and
but
then
that's-
sometimes you can't.
research. That'd be like my wife. We don't throw away cookbooks. She's a chef.
Mhm, mhm.
So, but none of my kids were going to want these books.
Oh yeah.
We
I
moved
probably
up
had the
here to
same
Northern
problem.
California. You know, I started purging. I just said, okay.
Well, you could, eventually it could be the Mark Lips Memorial Collection.
You never know.
Well,
in the li-
I did donate, but I donated these books. I've had little free libraries wherever I am, and you know, so hopefully I've paid it forward with that. And they were all history. It was all history.
Yeah,
you know?
that's with me. I have tons and tons of print books, but they're not novels. I mean, I have a handful, and I shouldn't say a handful, maybe 50 novels that are just favorites of mine that I've kept. But for the most part, if it's a nonfiction, historical, or anything I'm going to ever use for research, or just want to read the history, I need to have the tangible book in my hand. That's just how I am. I can't. I mean, if it's a novel, I'll get it on a Kindle. I don't care. It's disposable. I'm going to read it once as an escape, and that's going to be the end of it. But if it's something that I want to keep,
Agreed.
yeah, I've got another wall just like that one on this side, and then there's more on the other side that you can't see. So
You have
and that's and I've got them in another apartment. I've got them upstairs. I've got them all over the place.
do you have research assistants, or you do all of this
No,
yourself?
I do it all myself. That's the fun part. I don't. Yeah, I know that people do that, and I think it's a great idea for a lot of people. But for me, that's the part I enjoy the most.
But
I
people
mean, I
like
love the writing, but I love the research.
I mean,
know?
supposedly Michener had like 20 people on
Yeah,
staff.
that's what I've
Just
heard. And
crazy.
I know that a lot of guys who do podcasts and stuff that, historical or true crime or whatever podcasts will have a bunch of people, writing for them and researching, but that's just not for me. I do a podcast that's, it's history and true crime and ghost related stuff, but I write them all myself. I record them all myself. I research them all myself. That's what I enjoy. That's
Have
the
you ever
fun part
gone
of
and
it.
spent the night somewhere
Oh,
haunted?
sure. Yeah, that's yeah.
I
Yeah,
assume
when I
every place
was
I
about
stay is
11,
haunted.
I ran across a book by a guy named Richard Weiner, who he wrote a book called Haunted Houses, and in the back of it, it said that he was all these different things. He was a raconteur and a soldier of fortune and all these kinds of things. But all I got out of it was that this guy traveled around the country to places that were haunted and wrote ghost stories about it, and that's all I wanted to do from that point on. And that's pretty much what I do. I mean, within
I
reason.
mean, that's why
Oh.
that was your fascination with the old slave house. It's haunted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And it was in the second volume of his books. But I'd already been there long before Richard Weiner ever was. So
It should be haunted.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no-
Troy,
Well, everybody always said it was. So
but Troy, so that leads to the follow-up question, of
Sure.
course. Have you ever seen a ghost?
2 times in my whole life.
No
I'm
kidding.
not a psychic or something. I don't see dead people, any of that kind of stuff. But the 2 times I actually once I saw a ghost in an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium. Some folks had bought it and they were getting ready to clean it up and open it to the public for tours and things. And a buddy of mine who knew them took me on a tour of the building before they opened it. And we were walking down a hallway and we were just strolling along talking. And a man who looked as real as you or I walked across the hallway in front of us, maybe 10 feet away, and startled us because, people broke in there all the time, as you can imagine, abandoned hospital. So once we sort of, got our senses back, we went to tell this guy he couldn't be in the building. We assumed it was somebody who broke in and walked into the room that he'd walked into, and there was no exit and there was no one in the room. But I would have never have thought it was a ghost.
What was he wearing? Vintage clothing or anything like that?
No, we only got a glimpse. I mean, we only saw that he had pants on and he had some kind of jacket. So it could have been like an orderly jacket or something, maybe, if it was a ghost from the building.
Where was this place at?
Louisville, Kentucky. It's called Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and now it's very commercial, but this was, 20 years ago.
Mark
Probably
and I
longer than
live
that.
by a tuberculosis sanitarium.
Yeah.
Right in
Yeah.
the same neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, they end up with a lot of stories.
What
places
was
like
your
that.
second? Ghost?
Now the other one, I knew it was a ghost because I knew who the guy was and I knew he was dead. I used to own a movie theater in Decatur. And it had opened up as a movie theater back in 1916, which was a big deal at the time. And it had gone through a bunch of owners, trying to get it off the ground. And then finally, these Greek immigrant brothers, took it over. And this guy named Gus Constantopoulos was the owner manager of the theater for like 50 years. And then he died in 1965. But there were always these rumors about how he still haunted the building. But I had no idea what he looked like at the time. And I just had an office upstairs, Gus's old office, but I never really thought anything about it. I had no idea what this guy looked like, not at the time. And I was sitting at my desk in the office and I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and I looked up and there's a man standing in the doorway looking into the office, and he's tall and he's thin. He's wearing dress clothes, got glasses on, he's bald, and he's just standing there looking into the office. And then he just turned around and walked away. And I told my friend on the phone, I said, I think I just saw a ghost. And she said, what? And I said, hold on, put down the phone. I went to the door because now I'm thinking, well, maybe I just imagined it. Maybe it was, our at that time we still had a projection, with the reels and all that. And I said, maybe it's just the projectionist coming in to get ready for the night show. So I went to the door to look. There's no one in the hallway. Now there was no place he could have gone. So I sat back down, I picked up the phone and I told my friend what had happened. And she said, oh my God, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I already did it. When I came back in, I closed the door and I locked it.
That'll keep
So
a
if he
ghost
comes
out.
back, yeah, yeah, that's not
That
logical
keep ghosts
thinking.
out.
But again, he looked completely solid. He looked like a person. But I
Right.
thought, wait a
Yeah.
minute, you know,
Yeah, they
and
won't
then
go
found
underneath before. No.
found photos of Gus, and sure enough,
That is
that's who it
crazy.
was. So yeah, it was.
I
it
you
was
know, I'm
crazy.
ambivalent about ghosts. My wife said something, aren't you afraid of ghosts? I said, I pray to see ghosts. You know,
Yeah, well,
there's people I would love to see.
yeah. I mean, I
I don't know
travel
why they
all
gotta be
over,
scary.
and
I
I
mean,
don't
they're
have all
gonna
these
hurt you, right?
experiences all
Ghost
the
isn't
time.
gonna hurt you.
Oh no, 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 no,
I
no.
fear
It's
the
just
living.
it's a little bit of history. Yeah, it's the living you have to worry
I know.
about, not the ghosts. So
I
you know.
live in a 1904 farmhouse, and the middle bedroom upstairs, one of my kids said he thought he saw a ghost up there.
Hmm.
But kids call it the ghost room.
When I was
Oh,
there,
yeah.
I saw several ghosts in Mark's house, but I might have been imbibing. I'm not sure.
You were imbibing.
Spirits of
and,
another kind. Yeah,
I was
Yeah.
haunted by spirits. Thank you.
yeah,
Troy.
exactly.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that. Who are Troy? Who are your writing heroes?
Well, I don't, as far as nonfiction stuff goes, there's so many. I mean, there's so many people that I really enjoy. If I had to pick someone who is a fictional person, just for the number of books they've written, it's got to be Stephen King. And it's not just because he writes horror stories, because not all of his books are about horror. In fact,
Right.
a vast majority of them are just personal stories. So the way he tells the story, I just absolutely love.
Well, when you were
But-
talking about carrying a book everywhere, I think of his memoir on writing. You know?
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I learned that, or at least from reading that book, I realized that I was not far off in
Right.
the way that I had always done it. You know, I mean, I was already writing by the time I had read that book, and that was how I learned, was just from reading and all of these other books. I mean, I'm one of those kids who for years had absolutely no idea how to pronounce out loud a lot of books. I knew what, or stories, words, I knew what they meant, but I didn't know how to say them. I mean, for years, I kept going around talking about how something was macabre. It was macabre, but I didn't know that.
You sure you didn't grow up in Mount Vernon?
Yeah.
Right?
It sounds like Mount Vernon speak to me.
I'm pretty sure that's how I pronounce it.
I never heard it said
No,
out loud.
our
So I didn't
family's
know.
It named that town in Indiana Versailles.
Yeah. Well, anything in Southern Illinois, I'm always trying to explain to people that that's not Cairo. That's Cairo down there.
That's
You
Cairo.
know, yeah, you know, so it's don't be fooled.
Cairo,
It's not
Illinois.
what you think,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so
A lot of history there, man. A lot
But
of
you
history.
know, I are you the kind of? I mean, Stephen King said that the locked and shut door is his a writer's friend or something. He said that if
Yeah.
he told his wife, if you open that door, one of the kids better be dead.
yeah. No, I'm not quite that bad. I learned, you know, a lot of what I was doing when I was really taking off with my career. I also ran a bookstore, and so I would write in the bookstore.
Was that
And
in
so
Decatur?
you would constantly get, you know, it was in Alton.
Oh,
And I would constantly get interrupted. You know, if it wasn't the telephone, it was an email, or it was someone coming in. Luckily, the store was not that busy. Most of it was mail order. So, but so I just kind of got used to that. But I've since gotten away from that, and I think as I've gotten older, a little more easily distracted than I used to be.
Hey,
Joan,
is it-
Joan Didion said writer's worst enemy is an interruption.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that.
No, it
Now
depends
these
when
days,
that
I would
interruption
agree.
is. Might be the break you need if you're blocked. You know, you just
Well, that's one thing I'm lucky to say I've never had writer's block.
Stephen King said he never
Yeah.
had writer's block.
Yeah, it's just I've always got something I can write about. You know, there's always something. If it's not the book that I'm working on, then it's some kind of history post for my Facebook page, or an article for a journal, or whatever. I've always got something I can work on.
Now I do this all the time. Do you clean up your work? Do you reread it?
No, that's what an editor's for. I will read it once. I might go back through. I mean, I write it, and usually I don't want to read it again.
But you
I'll
have an
write it.
editor? So you have you. Oh my gosh, that's right. You've got.
Yeah. So I'll kind of maybe go back over some of it and clean up, maybe polish. I'll do a polish, but I will not keep rereading it.
Yeah.
because there's too many things that go wrong. My favorite example of this is when you can't do your own work. I mean, you can't edit your own work.
That's true.
I had
I
written a
agree.
story or written an article, and I was talking about how the house, and this was still in the last century, so you could say it this way, that the house had been built at the turn of the century. Not now, I got to say the turn of the last century, but then I could just say the turn of the century. And a friend of mine was reading over it, and she handed it to me. She goes, "I want you to read me this sentence." And I said, "The house was built at the turn of the century." And she goes, "That's not what it says." And I looked at it, and sure enough, I had written the house was built at the turn of the cemetery. But I never saw it. I couldn't see cemetery until I stopped and read it one word at a time.
I had
So
the
no
same
one can
problem.
edit their own work.
I agree.
You just can't.
Troy,
Hey,
Troy,
I hate to do this.
have you on again. We're gonna have to have
We're down
We'll
to
do
a
it.
minute 30.
Oh,
and
gosh, we are.
Troy, how do people get a hold of you? Can they find the book?
The best
You
place
got
to
a
find
website?
me, the best place to find me is through my website, which is AmericanHauntings.net. That's got everything on it. It's got true crime stuff,
Great.
ghost stuff,
Great.
everything. And
just your
I'm on-
website, you go down a rabbit hole. Just
Yeah.
going to the website.
there's a lot on the website too.
Well, Troy, this has
Oh.
been, we didn't have enough time today.
But we'll do it
And
again.
I
We'll
want
do
to
it
say
again for
goodbye
sure.
before we get out of here. We thank you for your time. I'd like to connect with you.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful. Enjoyed your book.
Yeah,
And,
you guys are close by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for
we
having
could
me
have
on.
coffee
So,
sometime in
yeah,
Bloomington.
we'll do it. So
Well, go over to Susan's place and have a glass of wine.
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Till
Bye.
next time.
Thanks.
It's been good enough.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Good. 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 Enough. As good enough.